Developing right now in the cycle, Los Angeles just became the biggest city in the country to hike its minimum wage to $15 an hour. That is nearly double the federal minimum wage, and it's the latest example, and as we just mentioned, the largest example yet of local governments acting on an issue that Washington has so far failed to. Certainly a step in the right direction for millions of people who've been simply treading water in this post-recession economy. But if public opinion is any indication, it is just that, one step forward. A new survey out today finds that nearly 4 out of 5 Americans believe that it is easier to fall out of the middle class than it is to rise up into it. That is a very sobering statistic. But our next guest says that we can get our American mojo back. In fact, he wrote an entire book about how exactly we could go about doing that. Peter Kiernan is a former banker who believes that the American dream isn't only found on Wall Street. Great to see you, Peter.
Very nice to be with you. Thank you.
So I do want to start with the minimum wage. Interested to hear your thoughts on how important of a step forward that is. And also, you have in your book a plan of 10 steps that we could take to help revitalize the middle class. Lord knows that with this Congress, we can't get all of them done. So which one do you think is most central to restoring our middle class?
Sure. Let me try that first. As far as the minimum wage, I think it's a great idea that these other parts of the country have taken the lead. But if you look at it, there are about 145 million people who are working in the United States. And of those, about 3 million, a little over 3 million, are paid at or below the minimum wage. So it's a good step in the right direction, but it's just a shard in a mosaic. There's just a much bigger plan that we have to have. So good to do, good start, necessary, but nowhere near sufficient.
Right. I just want to pull up the poll that you mentioned, Crystal, the 79%, because we do the job numbers every month on this show.
Yes.
And as we talk about it, obviously, it's getting better and better. But the mood of the country is not that. You look at this poll, you have 79% of Americans throughout all ages and political affiliations believe it's more common for people to fall out of the middle class than to rise up to it. I mean, that, as Crystal was saying, is just a sobering statistic right there. What is the step forward? What do you think is most important? Would you say infrastructure is at the top? Also, jobs that don't pay enough, that are underpaid for people that are well trained to do things?
I think your second one is probably the most important thing, which is we are creating jobs, but the jobs report that comes out leaves out the most important ingredient, the market value of that job. Because it would be like the New York Stock Exchange saying we traded 1 billion shares today, but didn't tell you if the market went up or down. What we're doing is we're creating a lot of entry-level minimum wage jobs. These are not breadwinner jobs, and they are not multiplier jobs. Right now today, there are 4 million wonderful jobs that are open in the United States. We can't fill them. They're skill-based jobs. They're in biotechnology, in computer science, in digital work, and what we have is a skills gap. But if we can fill those jobs don't need to be created. They need to be filled. And I think that's really the opportunity we have right now. And yes.
Go ahead. Well, you also talk about it in the book, The Way Forward is about dealing with the growing consumer class or middle class outside of our borders. You talk about in 20 years, 80% of the world's purchasing power will exist outside of the U.S. 95% of the world's consumers will be outside of the U.S. How do we go about capturing those consumers and bringing their wealth back to these shores?
Well, I've spent a lot of my career trying to cater to those folks' needs. And the truth is, what we've got, what we manufacture, they want. What we create in terms of services, they want. And I'll give you one small example. If you take Japan out, in Asia, the proportion of the GDP of those countries spent on healthcare is about 4%. We're at 4 to 5 times that. That if I could predict anything with absolute certainty, it would be that the rising middle class in China is going to want, in India, is going to want world-class healthcare. We're the gold standard. We should be exporting that to these countries.
I don't know if you've heard about this, but some people are skeptical of bankers.
Yeah, I have heard that.
That's been talked about.
Yes.
But one of your arguments is it depends on the kind of banking, and you're advocating an infrastructure bank with different kinds of public-private bankers. What do you mean by that?
Here's what I mean. The one thing about which there's very little debate in Washington is that our infrastructure is creaking. And whether it's $3 trillion we need to do or $2 trillion, we have a major bet we have to make. Now, it's funny because when we malign China for spending too much on their infrastructure, when you talk to the people there who are your age, who are CEOs and stuff, they're saying, We're just taking a page from your playbook.
They just have to laugh at it from afar, honestly.
Of course. They're looking at you saying, why are you letting your infrastructure creak? You've got the greatest systems for airlines and everything else, and you're letting them fall apart. I think that what we should do is acknowledge and commit to a goal of $1 trillion expenditure on our infrastructure. I think that's going to create jobs, not just the middle-class jobs, but the great ones.
And so this is like a non-Wall Street bank. This is a bank that's focused on that.
This would not be on Wall Street. And frankly, what I would do is go, just like we did in World War II with war bonds, I would go to the American people. And that would be the 1% and all the way down and say, now is the time. Now is the time for you to invest in this country. If you believe in who we are and where we need to be, we need $1 trillion for infrastructure. We'll pay you a loan and we'll take out a great big bond deal with you. And I think you could get a lot of people engaged in the restructuring and the building in the United States.
I think that's a great idea. And what's exciting about some of the ideas in here is they're not left, they're not right. They're really, truly nonpartisan or bipartisan ideas that, in theory, could get a lot of support on both sides of the aisle. Peter Kiernan, the book is American Mojo Lost and Found. Thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it.
I really appreciate it.